I read an article on LinkedIn a few months ago or weeks ago, maybe, which really spoke about the malaise that is affecting a lot of us, which is about being busy and the fatigue that it's kicking in. I posted a comment on that article because that article resonated so very strongly with me. It was a time when, till then, we hesitated reaching out to people and really talking to them because we didn't know them. We wanted somebody always to facilitate an introduction for us. But I was kind of audacious enough to reach out to this gentleman who is on the other side of the planet. And what really surprised me was, one, he knew of who we were. More importantly, he was coming to India and he was coming to our city. Most importantly, he was coming to and staying in a place in Mumbai, which was just like a couple of kilometers from my office. And through that, we just bridged the sort of miles that sort of really existed, both digitally and physically. Philip Wise, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute delight to talk to. He's multifaceted. You can talk to him anything from consulting to advertising to digital transformations to human behaviors. The list would go on and on. But what I have found to be very, very singular and standing out about Philip Wise is his ability to blend all these different sort of key elements that enterprises require to function. He layers it beautifully with culture, with attitudes, and his understanding of India, I think, makes it all the more special and makes what I look forward to be a very insightful afternoon. He's also the author of a book where he introduces the whole concept of hyperthinking, and we'll just delve a little bit more into it. There he is also an expert on the whole personal branding sort of journeys that a lot of leaders, founders must definitely embark on. And so to hear more, I look forward to the next 60 minutes with you, Philip. So Philip, welcome, and thank you so much for being part of this and so readily agreeing to do this.
Very excited to be here, and I'm really interested in continuing the conversation that we started, first online, then in your office, and then now. And I think this is actually a great illustration that basically digital tools reinforce other ways of communicating and engaging, and you can go from one to the other. And the more you're able to do that, the stronger the ideas, the connections. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, Philip, let's straight away jump into it. We all said that 2020 was the year which a lot of us would like to forget. We also said that, everything just changed for us overnight. There was disruption, which brought in companies, countries, societies around the world went into a race against time. And today we're at the point where we're saying, hey, you know what? India is a billion doses vaccinations, and 1 billion of us are vaccinated. There is talk about returning to normalcy. And around the world, I think there is a question which we want to ask ourselves, and which really is around how much of this change is irrevocable. Do we see a departure from everything that we did, sort of like adrenaline kicking into our systems? That's how organizations responded around the world to the chaos that COVID-19 brought. And now, as we're moving back to normalcy, do we see a departure from some of this and going back to the ways of the old? So my first question to you is, how much of this change that it was brought about with this disruption is irrevocable? And what is it that organizations, it doesn't matter whether you're a for-profit, non-profit, and which part of the world you belong to, What is it that we need to understand about it?
I think that the change the COVID experience, the entire world has been through, is transformative. And if you look at every major crisis, every major episode, it changes behavior. It changes the way we see the world. It'll change the way we think about vaccines, the way we think about disease, the way we think about pandemics. So certain things will change the way we behave in the long term. That's absolutely certain. The other thing, of course, is the lockdown was this enormous experiment of getting people to work remotely, of course, completely unintentionally. But it's the first time in the history of humanity that everyone experienced an event at the same time. That's actually quite important. And the second thing is, of course, we had this structure, the internet, that we were able to use to overcome some of the main challenges that the pandemic threw at us. Now, is the change irrevocable? I think that to me, the way I look at it is that there were underlying changes happening already. And what the pandemic did was to accelerate those changes and basically get everyone to understand that it is possible to function, of course, in certain kinds of professions by using these tools, which were really massively underused. So it's not so much that, these things we all discovered Zoom. It's more that we suddenly realized that all these online tools could be used to transform the way we work, we communicate, to maybe do things differently. So I believe that that will shape the way we think about work, the way we organize our communication going forward. So yes, it's not something that we can erase, and there is no going back to normal. There's going back to a post-COVID world in which, like the 9/11 world, created a completely different perception of safety, of flying, of terrorism. This is a change that will forever shift our paradigm, if you want.
On that, then, Philip, since we are saying, you're right, in the sense we all embraced technology and digital because that became the only viable coping mechanism that organizations had to ensure continuity. Because you can't have a stalled economy forever, right? You have to press the reset button and move forward, which then actually brings me to really the next thing that I want to talk about, because digital transformation, and we rightly titled the series as Decoding Digital, because for one organization, digital could simply mean we started using Zoom for our team huddles. For somebody else, it could just mean an entire shift of operations. I know banking majors around the world brought in new hardware and software, or the tech giants, which made it possible for people to work. And now for them, that is a sort of a permanent way of operations. But, I am championing a lot around for the smaller organizations. Digital transformation means different things. It's not just a function of the amount of capital that an enterprise has to invest in digital solutions. It talks a lot more. And how would you therefore advise organizations when they are looking to embark on a sort of a digital transformation journey, or when they want to decode what does digital really mean for us? What are those components? Because I know there'll always be some part of the work we do, especially in the nonprofit social impact world, where some part of it cannot fully be replaced. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I know that there are alternative solutions and mediums through which organizations have stayed connected to their communities. So really, digital transformation, what is it that organizations need to understand for themselves when they decide to move forward on it? Because we also know of experiments and a lot of money spent, which can actually be most inefficient.
Yeah. So I just want to first touch on a point you made earlier, which is about continuity. And, if you go back to the history of the internet, it was actually created by the US military initially as a system to protect itself against a nuclear attack. And the idea was to connect computers so that if one hub goes down, you have another one that can replace it. And then it grew to the university and then to the rest of the world. So it was fundamentally creating an architecture and a network that would ensure that people could continue to function if a major disruptive event stopped things from functioning. And after this, so it wasn't the intention of the creators, it grew organically. Why? Because people like to communicate, like to send messages from one part of the world to the other. So the internet is an accident. It didn't happen by design. It happened because it kind of, it connected people, it connected organizations. Now, the second thing I would say when you talk about digital transformation, so I'm not a huge fan of the word digital transformation because, in some sense, the internet and digital is the new electricity. And you don't talk about, electrically transforming your organization. You just need it to function. You need to plug things in or then they just don't work and you can't operate. And I think you have to think about the internet and digital in the same way. It's part of the infrastructure. It's part of the design of things. Now, the other thing is I think we tend to be kind of excited about new tech developments and maybe the metaverse and virtual reality and things like that. But the thing about the internet is that it's an incredibly simple technology that connects computers and allows you to give information from one part of the world to the other. And that's why it's so powerful. And some of the first organizations that embraced the internet were actually NGOs. And the reason they embraced the internet is not because they had read some strategic document, it's because it was cheaper than sending letters, organizing big conferences and summits and trying to use, to reach the press. So they realized that if they send emails, if they post things on the web, they have tools that allow them to grow their network. And I think for me, one of the lessons I've always come back to when looking at how to use the internet and maybe how to operate your digital transformation is look at what the simplest things you can do are on the internet. And if something that, for example, connecting to all your members and asking them to participate in a campaign in a very simple way. Click here, join us, etc., on WhatsApp, on a message platform, on emails. So it's those simple things first that have the most power. That's why fundraising, mobilizing volunteers is very, very effective on the web. So when you're thinking about digital transformation, don't immediately jump to complex platforms, but think, okay, am I using a simple set of tools from email to websites to social media in an effective way with a very clear logic, which is basically, communicating. That's the first thing that you can do with the internet. You can tell people what's happening. You can get a two-way communication. You can start training people. You can create, video recordings to train people. And then you can get people to engage. So you can, and again, these are all what I would consider the simple things. You can recruit people through the internet. You can you can mobilize them to do something specific. As I said, you can train them, you can fundraise. So first, before thinking about a complex ERP or enterprise resource planning or whatever system, first look at the simple things that you can do, because I think what you're going to find is these are some of the most cost-effective things that you can do for your organization. And it allows small and flexible networks, like most NGOs are, to basically have a disproportionate impact. They can reach more people, they can network faster than a lot of big corporate organizations can, because they have to go through a slow approval process, whereas NGOs can be nimble and can operate much more like a network for which the internet was essentially created or works best for.
Oh, I think that's thank you very much for that, Philip. I think you're right. I think starting with what we already have, I like your quote for the day for this part, that internet is the new electricity. But again, on one side we do talk about keeping it simple and starting there and keeping it very, very fundamental. what are some of the other things that possibly organizations need to do in terms of being ready for it? Now, even on the simple and basic things, I just go back to people skills. There's always this whole thing. All of us have had to somewhere sort of upskill ourselves. It didn't matter actually if you were 21 or 22, the ability to upskill yourself is so much more quicker because you're a lot more agile and nimble, and sometimes the age comes in the way, your resistance and so on. Do you foresee organizations having to therefore looking at investing in their people on certain skills which need to be relearned and so on? And what could, if you could touch upon any one or two of those?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, what I tell, because I also teach students, and we have interns that we actually call hyperlearners at the organization. And what I tell people is, your most fundamental skill is the ability to self-learn, the ability to learn without requiring a structure, without requiring a teacher standing in front of you. And that again, is one of the incredible benefits of the internet, which is you have access to all this knowledge. And you can start educating yourself, whether it's to learn, to do Photoshop or to code or to bake bread, which apparently is something a lot of people did over the lockdown period. So the point is, you need to develop those habits. Now, when it comes to an organization, I think the more important things are to have a common set of values and a common language. Set of values means that you have to set the expectations. And I think looking at the NGO world, what's important is that people are getting people in their network who are able to grow the network without requiring a huge amount of training and a huge amount of supervision. So you want, autonomous people, and those are the ones that can really help you to build your network, that are doing different things and bringing that quality to the network. And to do that successfully, you need a common language and a common understanding. So it's okay, how in my organization do I approach this? Where are the channels that I'm going to be concentrating on? What are the kinds of stories that I want people to share? So then you need to say to people, look, in my organization, and actually I'll go back to my first big project. So when I was a student at Oxford, I started a student radio station. And at the time, we had a problem of communication. So each college in Oxford is physically separate. And if you want to pass a message from one college to the other, you have to write a note, and it's sent physically to the other college by a thing called pigeon post. It's incredibly inefficient. Now imagine you have 100 people that are working on your same project in 20 different colleges. It's an absolute nightmare. So I discovered the internet at the time. It was a pretty obscure thing. And basically it was in a computer room. So you had to have access to the computer room. But I said, okay, if you want to be part of this project, this radio station, you have to get an email. An email will be the tool that we will use to communicate. So if you're not on email, you can't join. At the time, I was number 3 with an email in my college. So a lot of people did not have it. So they had to go register and sign up. But that meant, once I made that rule, everybody was getting the updates of what the next agenda was, what meetings, what decisions we took. And so we were using a pre-browser internet, which means essentially text. But in terms of training, that was the key. So people had to get on the internet, understand how to use email. They had to check in several times a week. And then the ones who wanted to be team leaders had to know how to create a simple page with content on that page. And so again, this is very simple, and that's why I think it's a powerful example. So in your own organization, you have to design it by saying, okay, for me to function as an organization, what regular online check-ins do we need? It's not just a Zoom call. It can be an email, an update, using different tools to share information. And the key thing is to agree with your team on which tools you're going to use, the frequency, how you're going to communicate, etc. And to be honest, because of all the choices we have today, often in organizations, they struggle to make people use the right tools at the right time. So I think, again, it's not a complex exercise, but it's really hard to execute. So you have to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it in our organization. And the most important things that we want to achieve are, mobilization, training, whatever. So, and this is how we're going to use these simple tools to achieve that. So, and then you need to make sure that everybody in your organization is trained so that they can do that. So once you've picked those specific priority, whether you're using Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Slack, whatever, you need everybody to be using that in a clear and efficient way. And then to say, okay, now that we've got the internal communication working, great. Now let's create a training program. How are we going to create it? Well, we're going to create 10 videos, and everyone who joins has to go and watch the first 5 videos. And then they have to report and say they've seen them, and you have to check them. So you do have to design things with checklists, with a number of tools, but inherently it's not some complex training. And, I think, especially in India, because of mobile and because of the accessibility of these tools, you're able to do these things and to deploy them quite effectively.
It's interesting, Philip, because it almost, brings up the next question that I had in mind. We've all while we've all adapted to the online way of working and so on, there are some of us who still feel that, hey, you know what, our ideation sessions, our brainstorming sessions work so much better when we meet. Strategy meetings can only happen when we are meeting in person. Or to really talk in terms of values and culture building in organizations, right? We've always felt that, this is and we've prided ourselves on it, okay? And so there has been everything from dismay to regret to actually being very, very okay about the new norms around the way people are working around the world and in India as well. Do you think that organization culture building, the so-called value system that we want to create, do you see that sort of getting slightly compromised when one moves digital? How do we kind of, I don't know if this is a fair point to make, but the social change-making organizations, social purpose organizations, NGOs as we call them, we've always prided ourselves on the passion that we bring. They're fantastic anecdotes, and there are people here in the audience as well. I know people who are so very, very driven. It's very palpable when you meet them. And part of the culture building in organizations like these happen because they are drawn to this charisma, to this passion that is brought by this one individual who then goes on to build great institutions. How do we build and retain and foster that kind of value system and culture in the digital era? I've been personally, there's a second additional question to this in driving productivity. And, it's been fascinating to hear what ZN has been doing. I'm going to place these two. The first is largely around, the more emotive appeal and ensuring you're able to tap into that emotion and build institutions and retaining the flavor of that. And the second part then is the more pragmatic part about how we drive productivity. Over to you, Philip.
Yeah. So I think, the first question is, the challenges of this online working, and does it work, and can you create culture through that? And I think, it's a question of how you frame the question. So if you're looking at it and saying, I liked my organization, we worked in a certain way, and now we had to change. I mean, first of all, people don't like change, okay? We're wired as human beings to dislike change. Once we're doing something, we prefer to repeat it, and we're kind of resistant when things change. And of course, the COVID pandemic has been one of these big changes. Now, in terms of driving culture, and again, I think what's important to say is that the internet and these tools are, in my mind, completely neutral. They're neither good nor bad. They're not right nor left. They're just a tool, and they deliver things. Now, when you ask, can you create culture on these tools? The answer is absolutely. And, the kind of more some of the examples include what happened in the US election, which is incredible polarization of people because of these tools. We're finding out about Facebook and how they were driving these incredibly divisive issues.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm not discussing the goods and bads of it. Spoiler alert, I don't think it's good, but basically it's clearly a sign that you can get deeply emotionally committed online. And whether it's political mobilization or radicalization, the internet can create that incredible passion. Now, for you and for the NGO that you're working with, the question is, how do we mobilize our network, the people that are passionate? And what I'm just saying is that, of course, you can express passion and you can build very strong cultures through this. Now, if you're saying, well, we're an organization, we used to meet for breakfast and that was like how we built our culture, I would say, look, what you need to ask yourself is a first principle question. This is a kind of Elon Musk question when approaching a problem, which is, okay, what would I do if I was starting from scratch? And so the question is not, is it better to do one thing or the other? But it's like, okay, if you want to have the most impactful organization in today's world, well, you really want to build a very, very powerful network, because that network can scale and it can reach hundreds, thousands of people, and your core can be incredibly passionate and motivated. I mean, the discussion we're having now about social media is not about whether or not you can be passionate, because of course we're saying, look, teenagers are addicted, people are going crazy. So it seems to be driving a huge amount of emotional engagement and commitment. A lot, the media is focused on the negative aspects of that, but there is, of course, the positive aspects. People are learning things, they're connecting with each other, they're getting married, they're doing, people are doing millions of things online. And again, it is a channel, but it's a channel that's very much one that you can use to build an emotional relationship with people. So imagine that if you wanted to create a global organization tomorrow, well, you could do it from your room and connect to 10 people in 10 different parts of the world and just meet every week and have a chat. And that would be the beginning of a relationship. And, we don't think that love letters are something that's unemotional and cold because it's written on a piece of paper. We think it's deeply emotional. Online communication is the same. You can express emotions through those words, through pictures. So I don't think this idea that because it's digital, it's somehow fake and it doesn't have the power of face-to-face. I think that's just a myth and a preconception. Now, individuals might not like it, might say, well, that's not for me. That's fine. But I think the reality is that we're moving into a world where younger people are completely immersed in this, completely comfortable with having relationships over these channels, which doesn't mean they're not going to meet people. It just means that they don't exclude those relationships just because they happen to be digital.
Okay.
And I can come to the ZN question, but I'll jump
into
it. So at ZN, in my company, which is a digital agency focused on managing campaigns for organizations and companies, we made the switch to kind of go full remote first during the pandemic. So we were quite comfortable with digital tools, but we had an office and people would meet. And that was a big part of our culture and organization. Now, we were able to continue to function very effectively online. Of course, we're working in a digital space, but we then started to reinforce aspects of our culture. So we said, let's make sure we have regular network meetings. So every 2 weeks, we bring the whole network together. The second thing, and I think this is also in a crisis, it's very important to over-communicate, which means you have to make sure that you're talking to people on a regular basis. So you need to make sure that all the teams are having team meetings once or several times a week, that everybody is being kind of engaged to see if they're okay, to see what they're doing, etc. And I think you have to recreate the structure of your organization with those things in mind. And the office just becomes a much less important part of your experience. So in designing your organization, and I would recommend to anyone with ambitions in creating a social organizations, think about what a network can do for you. Think about how much more impactful you can be if instead of having to have an office in each city you want to operate in, you could have, different people who would be your hubs in each place, and they could meet in a cafe, they could meet in a public space. You could do 1,000 such organizations instead of having to do, one every year. So thinking digitally, understanding a network structure empowers you to grow at a much bigger and more effective scale. And I think, because a lot of these NGOs have a large network base, you can basically scale at zero cost. For a company, normally you have to, it means hiring people or paying them in some way. In the case of an NGO, often a large part of the network is volunteers. So you have an unlimited capability. Just find the people who are interested in your cause and can contribute something, and give them the possibility of contributing by writing, by emailing, by doing a specific action that you can then manage with those new digital tools.
Perfect. Philip, I think one of the things that a lot has been spoken about in the last few months, especially, is whether it's resilience, how organizations are resilient, how do people become more resilient. In fact, there have been at least half a dozen resilient frameworks that I know of that have been developed for organizations. I think that's what the opportunity that any sort of disruption presents, right? And somebody said now it's not EQ which is the superpower, but it is the resilience power that every individual also must have with them. So we went from IQ to EQ to social quotient to now the resilience quotient. But I think fundamental to all of this is it really starts, whether it's an enterprise or an individual, really starts by, what are those sort of changes that, one would need to make. And you can call it adaptive mindset. We can call it a bunch of things. And I'm very curious, what hyperthinking is all about. I know what overthinking is, but what is hyperthinking? Why is it essential, for any organization today? Maybe even for senior leaders, because if all enterprises are driven and steered by leadership and leaders, then leaders also need to start thinking on those lines, right? So I really would like for you to tell us about this, because somewhere I feel that organizations have to reimagine what they want to be, and that starts really in the way they think. So over to you, Philip.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to react to one thing you mentioned about, mindsets and resilience and things like that. I'm a huge fan of the growth mindset, which is something developed by Carol Dweck. And it's the idea that you don't want people with a fixed mindset who believe that they're born with a certain level of intelligence, but you want people with a growth mindset who are basically understanding that, your mind is a muscle, that it can be developed, and that, you have far more capabilities than if you limit yourself to believing that, you have a certain fixed level of intelligence. And that's actually one of the assumptions that I took behind when I developed the idea of hyperthinking. So hyperthinking is a framework. It's basically trying to help people to navigate through change and to adapt themselves to this new digital world. I chose the word hyper, not because of the overthinking, but because of the hyperlink. And I thought, how could you characterize the mindset needed in the age of networks? And I felt that there wasn't really anyone who had done this effort at describing something. And words can be very powerful. Once you have a word to describe something, it allows you to communicate with other people, and it allows you to see different things that might have already been there separately, but brought together in a framework. So I was saying, essentially, for myself, for my kids, for my team, for my clients, what is the mindset that I think will make us all more successful in this new environment? So it's not a claim that, I always think like this. It's what I believe we need to work on. And it has 4 different dimensions. So It's hyper shifting, hyper learning, hyper linking, and hyper acting. And this is how I kind of brought together different ideas. So hyper shifting is actually about our ability to shift perception and to shift paradigm. So, we all see the world through our own unique pair of glasses. We're all stuck in our preconceptions, but whenever there's a big change event, like the pandemic, we need to reframe the way we see the world. And that means challenging some of our conceptions, like, work does not always have to happen in an office. Maybe we have to rethink the entire structure of our organization. So you need to break your own preconceptions and you need to learn to challenge them. And, that's very hard because we're wired to identify with our beliefs. That's very true of political, religious beliefs. People say, this is who I am. Don't touch my beliefs. If you attack my beliefs, you attack who I am. I'm saying, learn to challenge those yourself. Don't be a prisoner of your preconception. And again, it's hard for everyone to do, but I believe the more we're able to do that, the more we can start understanding the world around us, the world in flux. And by the way, one thing I would mention to your viewers is that I started a course many years ago on hyperthinking, which I put on Udemy. And during the pandemic, it grew at an exponential rate. I mean, I think it went from 20,000 students, now 80,000. So over a pretty short period of time. And surprisingly, a lot of them came from India. Again, I did no promotion for that. It just happened organically. So quite an interesting kind of signal that people were looking for that kind of idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the second dimension is actually hyper learning. And that's what I was talking about before, which is you need to learn how to learn. You need to become a self-learner. And that means having a discipline where you say, okay, I'm going to build learning into my routine. And it doesn't mean I'm going to go to a course. I don't need to be at school or university. I have to do this myself. I have to own my learning. And it's something I have to do for my entire life. It never stops because in a world that changes, learning can never stop. And by the way, I think it's a good thing in general, but I think it's necessary now. So basically, you need to have this self-learning discipline. And, the internet means you can have courses, podcasts, videos, and of course, books. All these things are channels to keep your mind engaged in learning new skills and not to be afraid of learning new skills, even at the age of 50, 60, 70, doesn't matter. It really keeps your brain functioning to be learning. And the second part of hyperlearning is learning creativity. So, instead of thinking that creativity is some natural skill that people have, it's something that, again, like a muscle, can be developed. There are lots of creativity tools like mind maps, lateral thinking tools. Thinking has lots of things like that. Every time you practice that, your creativity increases a little bit, which allows you to generate new ideas, to, again, find new solutions that you hadn't thought about before. The third thing is hyperlinking, and that's understanding our digital networks. We are, when you're online, you're on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever platform you're on, you're networked to people and you can connect with them. And the better you understand your online networks and the networks that, the organizations you're working for, the more effective you can be at connecting with other people, exchanging ideas, sharing new things, finding money, whatever it is you're trying to do. So this is basically the new highways. They call them the digital highways 10 years ago. Well, this is how you get from A to B. And this platform exists. And the final point, hyperacting is not attention deficit disorder. I just was still going with the hyper theme. And basically, it's about the fact that, with all those new ideas, a lot of things we're going to try are not going to work. So we need to learn trial and error. We need to learn to fail along the way. We need to accept that that's the price to pay to innovate. And I mean that across every sector, whether it's education, healthcare, social good causes. You need to innovate if you're going to solve these problems, with a different mindset. So you need to try things. You need to be agile. There are a lot of methods out there called, Agile or Scrum developed in software, where you try something, you test it, and then you adjust after a week or two. And then you improve what you do. And again, this goes back to this growth mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you kind of want every idea you have to be perfect or to be right. So you're trying to prove everybody else that you're right. If you have a growth mindset, you're saying, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to find out what works. I'm trying to test an idea. And again, in a lot of organizations, hierarchical organizations in particular, people who are the boss, they have to have the right ideas. And so if you're trying, but what I tell people is you need to disprove things, because that's how you have more impact. And if you're driven by your real objectives, you're not trying to obey, some person in a hierarchy. You're trying to make things happen at scale.
Oh, Philip, I think the last segment of what you spoke is just priceless. I can just, and I'm so glad that right now I have most of my team across both my organizations listening, and I don't think we could have asked for a better masterclass, and so succinctly and placed before us. And you're right. I do have a follow-up question on this, and this is where I largely speak from the leadership perspective. That we have a lot of leaders and organizations. You're right. The growth mindset is something that we all need to inculcate. But I think leaders also wear the uneasy hat of expectations that they are able to come out with ideas that work, right? Layer that with nonprofit organizations who don't always have the luxury of time, financial resources, and so the room for failure, because I believe you learn more from failure than from success. But there is very little room for any of that. What is your advice to leaders of organizations? And then you have teams who are constantly looking at you to steer organizations. Any advice for them?
Yeah. So I think, you were talking about culture. So I think you need to build a culture in which failure is acceptable. Now, as a leader, you need to set the framework to say, it shouldn't be catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
It should be kind of managed failure. But, it's I say that, and I have a team, and we talk about different projects, and then you find yourself in a discussion saying, well, I told you so, and this was the thing, and you're wrong. It's like, okay, that's not the point. The point is what went wrong and what did we learn? And sometimes I'm in a meeting, I'm saying, I think this is really stupid, this thing doesn't make any sense. And somebody says, Phil, that was your idea literally last week. And I'm going like, well, it's stupid anyway. And I think, and that's our reality. It's like, of course we have many stupid ideas. Of course we make a lot of mistakes. And we need as leaders to be able to say, that was not a good idea, and it's okay. And I've just figured out, and it can be on fundamental things, it can be on small things. I think, people often talk about the small things, but sometimes you say, you know what, I've spent the last 3 years saying we should do this. And, it turns out I don't believe that anymore. And that's okay. It doesn't make me an idiot. It just means that I've kind of shifted. So I think the power of that in a culture is really strong, because it means the leader can listen to people challenging their ideas, not because they're challenging the leader, if you want. And everybody's kind of, I would say, more scientific. All these things are experiments. And as a scientist, you're looking at the result. You're saying, does it? What is the result? And it doesn't matter who around the table came up with the idea. And I'm sure, you've experienced the same thing when you have people say, well, that was my idea. And so it's kind of like, does that make the idea better? No, it doesn't matter, but it's really hard to do. But in this new age where, the structure of organizations, the way campaigns work are being created right now, we are going to make far more mistakes than successes. However, those successes, first of all, the failures can be controlled and limited so that they don't destroy the business or the organization. And from each little failure, you extract the learning, and that means you have to be looking for the learning. So you don't hide the failure. You don't kind of say, well, let's just not look at the failure because it makes us look bad. No, you embrace it. You say, well, why did we screw up on that? What was it? And then you can say, well, this is where I take corrective action. And, this sounds obvious. It sounds like common sense, but it is really difficult. And very often I see, that this is not the way people interact. So that's the, that I would say is how we have to embrace trial and error in the way we operate, in the way we plan, and in the way we anticipate results.
Thank you very much for that, Philip. I just want to know if there's anybody in the audience right now live who has any questions. I will only reserve 3-4 minutes for it. So if there's any question, please raise your hand and ask your question, please.
Yeah, I see. I have a direct question, so I don't know if it's for me or, but maybe we can. You had talked about this in our chat earlier, and please interrupt me if there's a question you want to jump into, which is how this transformation applies to India, and what are the advantages and the challenges that a space like India is facing, and I think India has an incredible opportunity. Because essentially you don't have, if you want, the legacy that a lot of European organizations and companies have, and US as well, which is kind of like, you get a little bit complacent when you've had all these massive investments. So you have to find things that are smart, that are agile, that are nimble. Now, on the other hand, you have an incredibly the internet is everywhere in India. It's, through mobiles, it's spread, and it's now near universal in terms of you can reach people through at least messaging. So the platform is there, but it's a very different platform from the one we have in different countries. And so you're writing a new set of rules for much more agile, much more dynamic kind of network. And I see this when you look at, the delivery things that you have in India, that, you can get something delivered in 1 hour. You can have, you have the Amazons, the Maidos, all these services that have kind of skyrocketed and that work, to be honest, better than they do in a lot of European cities. And so somehow I would say this new infrastructure that's really baked into the internet, I think could very quickly become more effective at delivering community, at delivering engagement than the old structures where people still want to depend on old ways of doing things. And of course, the other thing is that it makes you global from day one. It makes everything you do connect to the world and not just inward looking at a single country. So, and I think to me, what's always been incredible about India is its part in the global culture. The fact that Indians are everywhere all over the world. And that, this new, if you have this outlook on the internet, you can really bring that global story to life and connect to people all over the world rather than in a single city, single country.
Thank you very much for that, Philip. I think the last 45 minutes have been absolutely riveting for us. I do know that we're going to be sending out an email, not just to the people who have tuned in today, but to all our networks to read more about hyperthinking and to understand, for those of them who would like to explore the program on the listed course on Udemy. Additionally, we would like to keep the conversation going, as you rightfully mentioned, and thank you very much for that, to have a series of conversations. We would like to come back with more questions and answers in the follow-up session that we will have with you in the coming weeks. For all of you who have tuned in and joined us, the recording will be available on the YouTube learning channel of Toolbox. So please watch it, please share it, and please keep your questions coming into us to bring Philip back. Very, very distinguished and absolutely our privilege to have him here. And looking forward to seeing you soon in a few weeks. And thank you for an absolutely lovely afternoon, Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. So please feel free to connect. You can follow me on Twitter here and on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to share all that online. So have a fantastic afternoon, and we'll be seeing each other later online.
Thank you. Bye.
By the way, I saw some hands going up from the audience earlier on, so I don't know.
I didn't see any.
I saw two, at least from the thing. So it was just at the end, so I think they put it down again. But anyway,
well, we're going to collect all the questions for a follow-up session. I'd like to have a live Q&A. I think that